Using other people's models can only get you so far in game dev, so I finally decided that it was time to take matters into my own hands, and learn Blender properly so that I could make my own models. So what exactly will I consider learning Blender? Ideally, I'm going to make an island scene by the end of the week. We'll call that good enough. This of course isn't going to cover certain topics like character modeling or rigging, but I think it'll give me a very firm basis, especially considering I'm trying to do this way faster than any normal person would or should. Of course, when everyone starts out, they follow the donut tutorial, but I decided to be defiant. I was going to make a pancake instead. My thought was that if I watched the tutorial but maybe made something else, I would be able to learn better and more quickly. I didn't get very far. While I was eventually able to get the right shape and even a piece of butter, I realized there was just too much of a difference from a donut and a pancake for most of the videos to actually be useful. Not wanting to skip parts of the tutorial that would be important later, I swallowed my pride and decided to make a donut like everyone else. So I decided that if I was going to make a donut, I was going to make the best fake donut the world had ever seen. Or at least try to. Everything was going just fine, and then I ran into an issue that a lot of people seem to have, which was that the icing wasn't snapping properly. On a whim, I just kinda bumped up the thickness on the solidify modifier, and it would appear that more thickness equals more good. And after playing around with the sculpting a bit, it looked not that great. I know I said I was gonna make the best donut the world has ever seen, but just maybe not today. Continuing the donut, I added some color to my bland and boring gray donut, as well as colored the icing and added sprinkles. That's really all there is worth mentioning about the donut tutorial, but I finished the rest of it as well, and here's my render. Real complex stuff. I should also mention that I skipped a few of the videos on rendering just because they weren't really important to this challenge specifically. I do plan to come back to them later though. On day 3 I decided it was time to learn some environmental stuff, so I got to making an isometric room, which I did not enjoy very much, so instead I shifted to a low poly environment instead. CG Geek has this wonderful little tutorial on a forest type scene, so I loosely followed that. Probably about 45 minutes later and we've got this nice little environment. As you can see, I took some liberties with the campfire and added a tent. They don't look great, but I feel like they're better than what was in the video, which, with all due respect to CG Geek, was not a very high bar. So I maybe only worked about an hour today, but I did what I put on the agenda, so good enough. Alright, so it was the 4th day and I had quite a bit to do. The first of my tasks was to make an animal. I decided to make an elephant because a low poly one was the first thing I ever did in Blender years back, and I thought that now I was learning the software properly, it'd be a good idea to try to make a better version of that. So I did. Next on the agenda was plants. I looked around a bit, and when I didn't really find any tutorials I thought were very good, I decided I was just gonna figure it out on my own when I started the island. So then I looked into how to make water. Specifically, I wanted to know how to make waves that would crash on the beach. This was definitely above my pay grade, but, content. I was really just doing research that I was going to apply later at this point. Because I didn't really do anything else productive, I decided it was just going to be time to start on the island. So I went with the animal first. I chose a cat because it's a cat. So it turns out cats are actually very round, and low poly things are not so round. Well, I reasoned that it'd be far away from the final render, so hopefully it'll look okay at a distance. The cat from yesterday was not up to cat standards, so I made a new one. I found this really clever way to block it out with circles instead of planes on YouTube, and I used that. It still looks not great, but it's a lot better and it looks okay at a distance. I spent days 6 and 7 making the actual island. Immediately, I wanted to try the water sim because it was a new system and I thought that it would be smart to get it out of the way as soon as possible. The problem is, my brain is very smooth and I was in over my head. So, in short, I wasted all of day 6 and about half of day 7 screwing around with forces that I didn't understand. Making the actual island wasn't a problem at all though. I just sculpted a plane to look like a mound of sand and then added some palm trees that I got from this Polygon Runway video. After that, I added the cat and gave it a surfboard. Thinking that the surfboard wasn't all that useful if there weren't any waves to surf, I wasted more time with the water. It did not go as planned. so I settled for a static image of the island. It could be better, but it's definitely more than I ever could have done a week ago, so I'll take it. I think this was a good experience, even if it was just about the stupidest way to try to learn something. And while I think trying to cram learning Blender into just a week was not an ideal way of actually becoming proficient in it, it was more structured than it otherwise would have been, and incentivized me to work every day. So really, all that was wrong with it was that I should have stretched it to over 30 instead of 7. But hey, I did what I wanted to, I made an island scene in 7 days, so good enough for me.